Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Derek Belch. I am the founder and CEO of Strivr. More on us in a minute. Also wanted to introduce Josh Bersin. He is the preeminent thought leader as it relates to global learning and development, especially in corporate America and mainly the Fortune 500. Josh, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Okay.
For those of you who don't know much about us, really quick background. So I started this company about 4 years ago, and it was on the heels of a master's thesis that I did while I was coaching football at Stanford University. I played football as an undergrad at Stanford, went back to Stanford as a graduate student to coach for the team, and my thesis was to come up with a way to train football players using virtual reality. That project was so successful that the head coach of Stanford, David Shaw, actually sat me down at the end of my 2 years and literally kicked me out of the office. He said, "You have something awesome here. You gotta go. You gotta go start a company." So that is how Strivr was born. And for the first year and a half, we were mainly working with NFL and college football teams. I know you love this story. And then in the summer of 2016, we got a fairly fortuitous phone call from Fortune number one, Walmart, whom you will also see on a webinar at a later date from Strivr. And they were interested in seeing how our technology and our method of training athletes could apply to training their employees. And that set Strivr on a much different path. And here we are 2.5 years later. One of the reasons that Josh has been so kind to join us. And we work with a good percentage of the Fortune 500, building a category of immersive learning and taking this thing to previously unseen heights as it relates to how new technology can provide a better learning experience. So with that, Josh, this is really going to be about you more than us today. We obviously respect your opinion tremendously. It's one of the reasons that we've engaged in an advisory relationship with you. We're very, very fortunate for your time. So thanks for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure.
Good. So I want to kick off with talking about the 2019 report from Deloitte that just came out. Please talk to us about what we're seeing trend-wise in the learning space and how this report impacts what Strivr is doing as well as other technologies.
Sure. Well, one of the things that comes out of that particular study, which is a massive global piece of research, is that learning is now the number one human capital trend around the world. 92%, I think, of companies stated that it was either urgent or very high priority. And not only that, they also told us that they're not sure they're very good at it. Even though we have all these technologies and tools and content and authoring things going on out there, companies are struggling to figure out how to create learning that fits into the flow of work as work changes and people are busier and busier and busier and the economy continues to grow. So that's like the number one trend. And I would say the number two trend that came out of that research is that companies and individuals are worried about their jobs. Their jobs are changing very, very fast. Automation is not only affecting learning, which we'll talk about here, but it's affecting everything else. It's affecting sales and customer service and software engineering and manufacturing. And so employees are reaching out to their employers and saying, I want you to keep me up to date because I'm worried about my skills and my profession and my job and my earnings. So companies can afford to invest in L&D and training, and it's an enormous opportunity for them to really help their organizations and their employees perform. So it's a really great time for you guys.
Yeah. So on that note, what are employees asking for? I mean, you love to talk about the learning experience, right? The employee experience. So what are they asking for as it relates to new tools, technologies, experiences, et cetera?
Well, I would say the biggest problem employees have right now is they don't have enough time. Mm-hmm. They're busy. We've got our mobile phones, we've got our emails, we've got our text messages, we've got our meetings and conference calls and all these things that we have to do at work, certainly white-collar workers, but blue-collar workers have the same issues. And so they want an experience at work that is purposeful and meaningful to them financially, but also professionally or career-wise. So we've got all of this stuff we've thrown at people at work, the HR programs, the training programs, the onboarding programs, and they can't absorb it all. So things like immersive learning are like a breath of fresh air. We can now reach people in a much more effective way, on their jobs in a relevant way without interrupting them with lots and lots of things. So I think that's the biggest issue. And then the second issue is we have sort of this combination of hard skills and soft skills in the economy right now. There is a shortage of sort of technical people who can do machine learning and AI and software and all that, but that's a very, very small percentage of the workforce. That's like 3 or 4% of the workforce. 95% of the workforce are doing sales, customer service, they're working in retail stores, they're healthcare providers, they're manufacturing workers, they're marketing people, and they're looking for skills on how to work in teams, how to get along with people, how to deal with difficult situations, how to better hire people, how to be more inclusive, how to convey information in a new way. So we have these really bifurcated skills problems of the technical professional skills and the mandatory training, and then this huge appetite for more soft skills and leadership development. So it isn't all about technology.
Mm-hmm. So before we get to immersive learning specifically, one thing that you said resonated with me. You talked about automation and, people are worried about their jobs. Yeah. And this comes up a lot when I speak at conferences. I have personally observed going around the country for the last 4 years, visiting lots of different Fortune 500 companies, being on tarmacs with airplanes, being in auto manufacturing plants. Yeah. To me, it doesn't look like humans are going anywhere anytime soon. There's a lot that people still do. And I think, the robots taking over the world is a little bit of a misnomer, but just, talk about where humans are safe. And for us, training them to do their jobs more effectively is obviously very important.
Well, I completely agree with you, Derek. There were a lot of press articles about 55% of jobs being automated and so forth, and none of that turned out to be true. And, if you go back in time, when I entered the workforce in the 70s, we had PCs replacing typewriters, and then we had personal computers, more sophisticated, replacing PCs, and on and on and on. This is a continuous process, but if you actually look at the economics, there are more jobs right now than there are people. We actually don't have enough people for the jobs that are being created. And the skills that are mostly in demand are more sophisticated, complex thinking skills and service skills and interpretation skills. Even if you're a mechanic or you're a machinist or you're out there working with your hands, you have to come up with new ways of solving problems all the time and identify problems that are taking place faster than ever, things that software can't do. So the human elements to work are clearer and clearer and clearer the more it's automated. So I don't think there's any risk of us running out of jobs or machines taking over our jobs. The very, very routine work is going away. I mean, the toll taker at the bridge, who's collecting coins, those kinds of jobs will be replaced. But those people are usually, there's some research recently done by the World Economic Forum, and they looked at 62 different jobs that are being automated in different ways. And all of the skills that are no longer needed and the new skills that are needed. And their conclusion was that most of those jobs, you can completely reskill yourself in 13 to 15 months. So we're not doing away with people in any way.
Yeah, totally agree. So you mentioned immersive learning. Obviously, that's why a lot of people are here today. Yeah. You love talking about the first time or two that you saw virtual reality and the impact it had on you. Yeah. Walk us through your first experience with VR and why you were drawn to this as the next medium through which people will learn.
Well, in my particular case, I'm kind of a techie, and I've been playing around with computers since I was a young guy. And I have always been skeptical of new things because I've seen all sorts of new things that matured at different rates than we expected. And your brother, Danny, invited me down to your office when you were in the little place down in Palo Alto, kind of a little, little startup place. And I was down there one day and I said, okay, what the heck, I'll come by. So I came by and I walked in and I saw this, equipment and software and stuff going around. And he said, why don't you just try it? And I put on the headset and I went through the Black Friday simulation at Walmart. Yep. Well, first of all, I went through the football quarterback.
Sports first. Yep.
Oh my God. I was completely blown away. Then you put me in Black Friday at Walmart. Yep. Then we did a job interview. And within a half an hour, I was completely convinced that this was an enormously transformational technology. And the funny thing about it was, as an analyst, I had not really paid attention to the space much because I I thought it wasn't ready. And after that one afternoon, I went home and I realized it was way bigger than I thought. So I think one of the things that I hope people on this video learn is that this is a technology that is much further along than you probably think it is. It is absolutely ready for prime time. And my one experience with you guys that first day, I still vividly remember that entire experience end to end. And I've been through a lot of training programs, and I don't remember any of the other ones. So it's very, very effective.
Yeah, we like to say that while it's certainly the bottom of the first inning as it relates to where this technology is going over the next several decades, to your point, it is ready for prime time. And we're very transparent with customers of where it's evolved and where it still has work to do. And Strivr likewise, along with the technology, right? And we'll be honest with that all the time. But to your point, it's ready for prime time, and it's ready for mature organizations to integrate into their learning plans for their employees today, right now. So to that end, talk a little bit about where you see this fitting in.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, and you guys may know this better than I think in the early days of this technology, it probably was used for, like I used to see oil companies would do this in drilling rigs, where it was millions and millions and millions of dollars to create a simulated situation, and the cost of failure is very, very high. So they could afford to spend $1 million on a VR, handcrafted thing.
Flight simulators.
Flight simulators. It is way beyond that now. I think if you look at most of the learning situations that companies have, what most organizations realize is the best learning is some form of a simulation. Like when I went through sales training at IBM when I was a young guy, we did simulated sales calls. And so there was an instructor, and there was a facilitator, and there was somebody who scripted it all out. And those were really, really effective programs, but they were really expensive. They weren't scalable. You couldn't do them for all job roles. That is the exact kind of experience now that we can do for almost every job using VR, where you really put somebody into a situation that is a real world situation they're going to experience at work, whether it be somebody with a gun in a retail store or a plane that you're inspecting and you can't find the broken part, and do something that would have been very, very expensive or very difficult or just not very scalable to do any other way. And if you kind of go through that mindset, you find there's hundreds of applications like that. So I think VR is on this accelerating curve, moving from these, once very expensive problems to more and more of the everyday problems that we have to learn about at work.
Yeah, well, I know you love this example. One of the coolest things that we have seen is how similarly the brain treats virtual simulations relative to real life. And we have actually compared pencil and paper quizzes, training and learning, right? For lack of a better term, what the industry's done for the last several decades and how students score on those relative to how they score in virtual simulations. And as we found, they perform far worse on the virtual simulations than the pencil and paper. And we say, well, so no duh, right? Because this is actually how they're going to perform in the real world. So if you can train them to ace it in a virtual simulation, odds are they will actually do that job correctly in the real world because your brain treats virtual reality just like it would real life. So on that note, let's talk about data. I know you, in addition to technology, you love data. Virtual training obviously is a treasure trove of potential information that organizations can use to understand the effectiveness of learning, make financial decisions, operational decisions, et cetera. So what are you most excited about, and how do you think data will play out here?
Well, I think I think you guys are doing this already. I think what we're going to find from these kinds of solutions is we're learning things about human behavior that we could not possibly have picked up in a traditional training organization or traditional training program. Why does a retail employee in a certain situation not notice something that's causing a customer problem? We don't really know. I mean, we can teach them what to do. We can beat it into their head with tests, but then when they go out in the real world, they don't do it. In a VR, we would know that. We would know where their eyes were, what was distracting them, why they didn't turn around and notice something. all of those subtle things, these subtle cues, including management skills, interviewing skills, objection handling skills. Unless you videotape somebody and watch them every minute, which nobody has time to do, we can't pick that up. In VR, we can, with hundreds and hundreds of employees. So I think we're going to get feedback loops on what high performance looks like that we've never had before with VR. And I know you guys are beginning to find that now. Now that's new, and we'll get better at that over time. But I think that's it's kind of one of the ultimate benefits of this.
Great. So you've talked to some of our larger customers, the Walmarts, the Verizons, even some of the smaller ones, and you're on the speaking circuit quite a bit. What are you seeing and hearing best practices related, Strivr or otherwise, as far as how companies are using a new, scary but ready for primetime piece of technology to impact their learners?
Well, I think there's companies in airlines and like I said, oil companies that are familiar with this type of technology on the very, very high end, and so they are in some ways the most amenable to bringing it in for more modest applications where they don't have to spend so much money. But I think the best examples are situations where they work with a vendor like you guys and they identify a big problem that has a big ROI that is complex or difficult or very expensive to solve. And it turns out in most cases VR is an incredibly useful solution. But this isn't off-the-shelf stuff. You can't just buy the glasses and sort of turn it on and train people. Yep. They need consulting help from a company like you guys. And one of the reasons I'm so excited about Strivr is you guys have gone way down the learning curve on how to identify the right problems, how to create the right kind of content, how to automate the right kinds of interactivities, what data to capture. The funny thing about VR is now that it's popular, there's a million little tinker toys out there. I mean, I see these little sort of PC tools and little apps you can buy on your phone. I don't think they're going to be able to do what you guys do. I mean, these are sort of industrial strength problems that can be solved with this technology at a very, very modest cost. But that doesn't mean you can buy something off the shelf and do it yourself. So eventually it may reach that point. But I think right now you guys are sort of in the hot bird seat.
Thank you. And when it does, hopefully we will be even further along to the next thing, right? Augmented reality, or what are some of the advanced analytics or the non-off-the-shelf offerings. So one of my most favorite pieces of data that you've shared with us is how companies spend their money in the L&D space. And you have that quadrant, that talks about competitive advantages versus have-tos, et cetera. So budget-wise and as far as selling this internally, right? How can HR and L&D leaders, engage other parts of the organization? How should they be thinking about how they spend their money, how they spend their time, et cetera? What tips can you give?
Well, I think the first thing is you have to be ready to accept the fact that a groundbreaking solution like this is going to come along and you're going to need to get the money. You can't just say, we'll wait 2 years, because you'll miss the whole thing. So you have to find money in the L&D. If the budget is fixed, the chances are you're spending 2/3 or roughly a half or more on stuff that you really don't know what the ROI is. And that's the bottom left quadrant of that grid. And so that you have to go through this exercise and say, what are some of the biggest problems we have that are going to get a high ROI, whether they're safety related, performance related, culture related, where we can afford to invest in some new technology. That's number one. Number two, once you've earmarked that money, you do a prototype, you do a proof of concept, and you realize that you can scale it up and get involved in this new technology. I think this is going to be revolutionary across many, many aspects of L&D. But you won't know that until you start. And so every company's got to go through their own learning curve. Just like e-learning was the same way. I mean, all this stuff started the same way. The third thing is sort of this issue of human performance. We're at a stage of the economy right now where the only thing that will differentiate a company is the human performance equation. You're not going to be able to hire more people than your competitors. There aren't enough people. You're not going to be able to build software faster than your competitors. They can hire the same software engineers you can. They can hire the same salespeople you can. It's how well they perform in your company. So these really important company-specific techniques and practices and cultural aspects and business processes are the magic to your success. And immersive learning institutionalizes that in a way I have never seen before. So this is a huge ROI investment. And the fourth thing that I wasn't even really thinking about as we were talking about it is the engagement that this drives in employees. People love this stuff. You've seen the Walmart data.
Yep.
I mean, I'm excited about it after a half an hour playing around with it. It makes you like your employer more. It makes you like your job more. It makes you want to learn more. It makes you like your L&D department more. I mean, there's all sorts of positive aspects to this that are really important in an economy like the one we're in now.
You want to join our sales team? Oh, that was great. We've been engaging in advisory capacity, but come join the sales team.
I'm not that good of a sales.
So a couple questions from the audience to close. We had a few folks submit questions ahead of time. Number one, Strivr, immersive learning, e-learn, whatever. Throw us out the window for a second. There's a lot of people watching this that probably this is their first time or maybe their most intimate time getting access to you, and they want to know what you think. So if you could give one piece of advice to an L&D professional on anything, Strivr or otherwise, what would it be?
I think right now, because of the pressure on L&D and the demand for learning amongst business executives and employees, you have got to be more innovative and more creative than ever before. You're not going to solve the problem by copying what everybody else does. I mean, you're going to have to do some of that, but you're going to have to create something new. And most L&D professionals are very creative anyway. That's kind of one of the reasons they're in it. And so taking advantage of a technology like this, with this creative instinct of building something that's really different for your company is a huge opportunity. And I think that now is the time to do this. Mm-hmm. And the second thing I would say about Strivr, let me just make one little pitch for you guys. You don't come from the L&D profession.
You're right.
I mean, it's kind of interesting.
A lot of us do. I don't, but yeah.
But I mean, I think what you guys have done, one of the reasons you're so successful is that you are learning really, really fast from the clients, from the technology, from the solutions. You didn't come into this thinking you knew the answers from the beginning. One of the problems I think in L&D is there's a lot of people that have done this a long time and they've already decided so-and-so is not going to work. Mm-hmm. And that's not the way this works. Mm-hmm. The way humans learn is very complex. We're always coming up with better solutions and better technologies. And I think you guys are an example of an organization that has figured out something that most companies haven't learned how to do yet. Mm-hmm. And you can help large organizations do that. So I think you're a really important vendor.
Thank you. We do pride ourselves in the phrase implementation first, technology second. And to that point, we have spent a considerable amount of time with myself leading, because I don't come from a learning or technology background, leading the charge on, hey, let's just figure out how this is going to work in your company. Yeah. Who's going to use it? When? Where? What data are you trying to collect? Right? All of the things that have nothing to do with technology, little to do with learning, really more about culture change and aligning change management and aligning with the customer on how you will use this and be successful. And then we'll put those bells and whistles on it over time. So I'm glad that you brought that up. Thank you. Another question that we had, and you mentioned this a little earlier, soft skills versus hard skills, for lack of a better term. You have publicly and in this webinar talked about the importance of soft skills to really corporate America at large, but L&D specifically. As it relates to what we're doing with VR and immersive learning, should we be thinking about them similarly, or are they actually very different?
Well, I can't say I know the answer to that. I think they're different, but very similar in some respects. There's a lot of ways to learn technical skills. If it's a hands-on, physical thing, you kind of have to do it. If it's an inspection, if it's a safety procedure, if it's an operational procedure, you learn those things through the techniques, the technology, understanding the principles behind it, trying it, getting feedback. Soft skills are very different. Soft skills, you have to put somebody into an uncomfortable situation where they come to grips with the fact that, wow, I really don't know how to do this. Mm-hmm. And that's actually hard to do. And most people don't like that. Yep. But that's where VR can do in a safe way. It can put people into this situation where they're actually working very hard to learn something that they didn't realize they didn't know how to do well. Yep. And, you know, in my experience in the business world, I've been in the business world since the 70s. If I think about and I'm a technical person, and I always love technology and that sort of stuff. All of this, you know, things that I've looked back on, the most important learning I've had is how to work with people and how to work in teams and how to deal with problems and how to listen.
Yeah.
Things that sometimes people just aren't very good at.
Yeah.
And I've seen research recently that now we're all running around with our headphones in and we're talking on our phones all the time. We're not as good at, you know, human interactions as maybe we have been in the past. So I think soft skills are a bigger opportunity than most people realize. And I'm amazed at how effective VR can be in those kinds of problems. So I think that's a big market.
Yeah, I will never forget a demo that I personally gave maybe 9 months ago, not even that long ago. And it was with a university, a business school. Mm-hmm. And one of the professors who teaches, you know, organizational behavior, negotiations for a living, someone who you would think would be very comfortable in these areas. And he went through a demo where he had to fire somebody in virtual reality. He was talking to an avatar. Yeah. And at the end, I took the controllers from him and they were sopping wet.
Yeah.
And I mean, he was so nervous, he was sweating. And, you know, I said, I went to the room and held it up. If anybody doesn't think this works, here you go. And he was like, I don't like firing people. Yeah, so I agree with you 100%. Yeah. I like how you said that. It's something that it's really hard to prepare people for.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks they know how to do it. And then you put them in that situation and it's like, oh my God, this is a different deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Josh, we are very, very appreciative of your time. Thank you. You know, you've joined the Strivr family and you've been a massive resource to us. And we hope that, you know, everybody watching has gleaned a ton of information. And obviously, if you guys want to know anything more and follow up as it relates to what Strivr's doing or have any questions for Josh, you know, please feel free to reach out. Thanks for joining us.